All right, here we are streaming live. Libertarian Party of Chicago policy show.
Howdy.
Thanks everyone for
Hello.
and tuning in. Yep, we have Adam Balling.
Good to see
Adam,
you, folks.
All right, let's get started here. Quick background, I guess we had talked about at some of our recent affiliate meetings, local chapter meetings, about trying to put some policies in place that would kind of reflect the Libertarian Party here in Chicago, and I guess the state of Illinois as well. So here we are to talk about some things that might be affecting folks locally. We can maybe go around and introduce ourselves. My name is Jim Hume. I'm treasurer of the Libertarian Party of Chicago. I host the Second City Liberty podcast. I have a background in political science and have worked with Democrats, Republicans, Libertarians. I worked with the Illinois Public Action Council right out of school, working on energy policies back in the early 1990s, and became a libertarian somewhere in the early 90s after becoming disillusioned with the two parties. Jerome Bell, why don't you talk a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, Jerome Bell. I'm kind of similar to Jim, just looking for just liberty, one way or the other, as simple as that sounds. And not finding it anything serious in the two major parties. Just wanted to work with locally, whatever party is best getting the job done. And so I'm here to really push for practical policy to know, so people know specifically what does it look like to do something different than the status quo. So that's me.
Nico, you're on screen here, so why don't you go next?
Hi, I'm Nico Tsatsoulis. I'm all for liberty and freedom, and I ran for Cook County Assessor last year, and I keep on looking for more challenges and more work towards more freedom and more liberty for all of us.
All right, joining us with audio only, Justin Tucker.
I am Justin. I've been involved with the LP now since 2015. And I do all sorts of things. I'm currently the executive director of the state party. I'm also an officer in the local Chicago chapter. This is looking forward to this discussion.
Great. And we have Adam Balling.
All right. Hello. And I am Adam Balling, chair of the Chicago chapter of the Libertarian Party. And I first became politically active in the Libertarian Party with Gary Johnson's 2016 campaign. Before that, I'd been a concerned citizen, but a relatively disaffected voter for the other larger parties for years before that. And since 2016, I got more active in the local Chicago chapter. And where I first met Justin and the rest of you, I later ran for chair in 2020 and have been serving in that role ever since. I've also served in some other volunteer roles with the Libertarian Party here in Cook County, where I'm the vice chair. Serve with a couple of you, and also I represent my congressional district in the State Central Committee for the Libertarian Party of Illinois.
Fantastic. The kind of the purpose of these discussions or these shows is to kind of discuss policy or put some ideas together, maybe come to a consensus on a few things that the Libertarian Party of Chicago can get behind and support. that affects folks here locally in Chicago and Cook County. And I think the first topic we wanted to kind of talk about was school choice, the public education versus private education system that we're currently under. I believe the next election cycle in 2024, we will start having elected school board members here in the city of Chicago. So that will be some policy that we can craft and look for candidates that are in line with what the Libertarian Party of Chicago is all about. But I'm going to hand it off to Jerome here and maybe get us started off, Jerome, with some things that you're thinking about.
Sure. I think with the question around school choice is, with any policy, I like to challenge us to never raise any taxes, fines, or fees, but to try as best as we can to come up with solutions that make it clear how the free market can provide a better solution. So not just take away a service per se, for example, but to also point people to concrete examples where they can find a solution in the private sector, or to incentivize a solution in the private sector. So just want to throw that out there as guidelines maybe we can consider. That's in line with liberty. So when it comes to school choice, to be honest, I've never really heard a good argument against it. So I want to maybe just kind of throw it out there to the group, and usually it's a voucher system that I hear that's popular in terms of a voucher per every child. I don't really know what is the argument against it. I don't know if we're just kind of sandbagging here on this issue, or maybe I'm being naive, that there are strong arguments against it that we need to really put our brains together to come up with a practical solution. So does anybody, that's a good summary of, like, say, vouchers to get started in favor of school choice. Is there anyone know, like, the strongest steel man argument against school choice?
One that I have heard is that if you allow vouchers, then the schools that accept those vouchers then have strings attached to them. And then they have to probably abide by certain standards to qualify to receive voucher money. So that's, as you said, there's not a lot of bad arguments against it, but this is one that I've heard over and over again by critics that I think is worth considering.
And I know that one other one that I've heard mentioned frequently is that, and I think this has been coming up in some of the discussion around the mayor's election and the runoff for mayor of Chicago now, that the schools that are having a hard time or underperforming or struggling with enrollment, that the argument being made against it, the vouchers will thin them out further. But we also would presume that some of those schools are struggling with things like terrible class sizes already. So there should be some trade-off there as well. Not every class would have 35 or 40 kids in it if some of them went elsewhere. But by allowing the students or their parents to take that voucher, dollar figure with them to another school, leaves them, worried that it would cut off the blood supply to some of the campuses. And the one riposte I've heard of that is at least make some of those campuses more manageable with class size, teaching 20 kids instead of 40, that kind of thing.
Well, I mean, I personally,
that's about it.
We really do need a free market type of solution here with schools, and if there are schools that are not able to perform, then they need to be removed or replaced. I'm just going to throw this article up here. We have 55 Chicago schools, 55 Chicago public schools. and none of their students are proficient in either reading or math. To me, that's simply unacceptable. Um, so something has to change, and the big argument that I hear about school choice is, sure, those that can afford to send their kids to better schools will certainly do so. The voucher system may make up for some of that, but you're still leaving some students behind that would not be able to participate. But to me, the Chicago public school system is a failure. It has not done anything to improve the livelihoods of children graduating from the system. And I believe that the public school system in Chicago is one of the root causes to a lot of the problems that we have in the city. Citywide, it's kind of the root cause of a lot of things that are going on.
Yeah, I would add that public schools all over the world work for the benefit of the teachers and the administrators as opposed to serving the kids. And that's not the Chicago phenomenon. I guess in Chicago, you find one of the worst manifestations of this situation, but it's not uniquely, I mean, it's not exclusively that you find that in Chicago. And that's why the basic argument is that the government should be providing the financing and not the operation of the schools. The government should have nothing to do with the operation of the schools, but the government should definitely provide the money for the schooling of the kids. Now, it's the teachers' unions that want the operation to be in the hands of the public sector. Nobody else actually wants that, and they're so powerful, and their interest is so powerful that they exercise this power along the political spectrum, and they end up controlling the public school system.
Yeah, definitely. That's definitely correct. In Illinois, on average, schools spend over $13,000 per student for public schools, and that's a lot of money. But where does that money go? Most of that money is going to administrators, superintendents making $250,000 a year. There used to be teachers' colleges, and people would go to school just to learn to teach and to teach children. Now you need a master's degree in most cases to be a public school teacher. They keep raising the requirements for teachers as the test scores for students keep plummeting. So the more money we're spending isn't going to the students. It's going to the inflated salaries of administrators. It's going to the teachers' unions. This is where all that $13,000 is going, and it's not being spent to educate students. It's being spent on administration. It's being spent on pensions. That's a whole nother issue that is creating a problem. Are the teachers' pensions and the teachers' union pensions? So that's where the money is actually going to, and it is kind of interesting if you look at some other statistics I can throw up here, that in Illinois is one of 42 states where it's actually costs less per student at private schools than it does for public schools. Considerably less. I believe that number is somewhere in the $8,000 per student range instead of the $13,000 per student range. Now, imagine if parents didn't have to pay the taxes that are now going to the public schools, and they had that money to spend as they saw fit. They're actually going to be spending a lot less per student for what many consider to be a higher quality education. Private schools don't have the administrative structure, the superintendents, these administrators with PhDs that demand six-figure salaries. So more of that money is going to the classrooms and to the students, where it really should be going.
So, Jim, you're saying a potential benefit of the vouchers system is that it could literally be cheaper.
Oh, absolutely. It could be cheaper. It's going to be more economical to the parents. The problem is, that money's not going to those members of the teachers unions, the superintendents, the school principals, and those are the ones that are crafting the policy. They're the ones that have the ear of the politicians. They're the ones that are donating to campaigns and aldermanic races and mayoral races and governor races and county commissioner races. They're the ones that are the real backbone of the political process, and so that's why their voices are heard. They have the political clout and the economic influence to be able to sway politicians to make sure that their jobs are secure. And I think that's the biggest the biggest issue or the biggest pushback that you see on a voucher program or a fund schools, fund children, not schools type of policy, is that pushback is coming from the organized teachers unions and other public sector unions that would lose a lot of influence and a lot of clout and a lot of power if that were indeed the case.
FYI, I'm jotting this down. I'm kind of taking minutes, so to speak, so that we can later put this on our website. So I'm jotting down that cheaper per student, and I'll get that link from you later, Jim, as a pro for it. I have another question, but it looks like Adam has been itching to say.
Oh, well, I think that figure that Jim quoted for 13,000 average statewide, I think it's somewhat higher in the city too. I think it's more. I'd read earlier. I do not have the link handy. I think it was more like $17,000 per student in the city. And the one thing I was thinking of though is that we have, in a very truncated way, and I know I'll be possibly looking at this very soon for my own child, who will be turning 5 later this year, that they have the ability to sort of, within the public school system, apply for different campuses for your child to go to if you don't want to go to your neighborhood school. So we have, through a sort of back doorway, this has been described as the two-tiered public school system. And you see this in a lot of the north side of Chicago too, where there are neighborhoods that maybe once upon a time would have been the subject of white flight, but have been so thoroughly gentrified that the public schools there have become quite prized and quite high performing, often for more affluent families, and in a way that's more sort of akin to the suburban public school system. I'm a product of the suburban public school system in the north suburbs, and I mean, they're whatever the educational bureaucracy operating costs were, the parents and the teachers were pretty well invested in, more than we tend to think of when we think of the public school system that's really struggling in Chicago, or struggling in a lot of areas that are poorer. And I've noticed this sort of two-tiered educational system. I remember there's an article, this must have been 10 or 15 years ago, that was demanding more selective enrollment high schools. That they wanted to go, I think it was from 8 to 20 selective enrollment high schools within the Chicago public school system. So that even within the system, there's already some kind of pressure for people to get more opportunities for their kids, even if it sort of begs the question of like, well, if you need 20 selective enrollment high schools, would you consider a much more radical voucher system? Or people on the other side who say, well, why don't you just automatically make all the campuses better? But that's not going to happen either.
Well, yeah, you could say that, but then what do you have in plan to do it? Like you look at
magical thinking.
Yeah. And I think we do. I mean, tying education to property taxes, I think, does a huge disservice to the educational system as well. This is a big problem, and obviously, um, uh, you have some communities, especially on the south side and south suburbs, where they're paying a large portion of a percentage, a much higher percentage of property taxes. And even though the because the property taxes are the property is of lower value, they have to pay a higher percentage of taxes in order to fund these schools. So it's really it's kind of a vicious cycle where you're never gonna be able to kind of get out of, as long as that's kind of the case. So a family in Hinsdale living in a $1.2 million home, maybe they're only paying 3 or 4% property tax, where the homeowner in Dalton, who has $112,000 home, is paying 40% in property taxes, because they're having to fund the educational system through these property taxes, and it just puts a greater burden on especially some of the poor areas and underserved communities. So I think really getting away from tying education to property taxes has to be a step we look at, as far as starting to make some improvements.
Okay, we can. I think we should definitely revisit the. So school choice is just.
And libertarians are primed to take advantage of spreading these ideas in Cook County, especially as we go back to an elected school board starting with the next election cycle. So this will be a big, there's hardly a school choice, organized school choice contingent in Chicago. We can be that. And with these upcoming school boards, we can totally seize that opportunity and use these ideas to hopefully get people elected and to spread those ideas to the electorate of Chicago.
Yeah, it definitely needs to be a topic that we're on top of, and that we're talking about even now, and start looking for candidates, or following candidates that are interested in going to be running for this school board, that are more interested in funding the students, funding the kids, as opposed to the administration. But again, Chicago's teachers union is powerful, and I believe in the 2022 election cycle, 2023 elections that are going on now, school board races are being funded by outside organizations on both sides of this argument like never before. So there's money being poured in from the teachers unions, from the pro school choice side, unprecedented in the amount of funding being poured into some school board races all across the country. So this is a battleground that is only going to get crazier when you start looking at an elected school board here in Chicago.
Jim, or excuse me, Justin, did we address the strongest argument against it? Did we address that?
It would be like strings attached, like
attached.
So in Illinois, I mean, they would, the unions already would, let's say that there's a more robust voucher system that happens to be implemented. Obviously, the politicians in power are going to be writing those rules. So, so you can just imagine, like, oh, you want to take vouchers? Well, your school has to teach X, Y, and Z, and throw all sorts of maybe weird stipulations on there that can make it very, that can dampen the private schools' ability to do things their way.
So our rebuttal would be, our policy that we propose is simply, would you say, a no strings attached voucher system?
Yes, as little strings as possible. People who, Christians pay taxes, Muslims pay taxes, people can pay to send their kids to, schools that can teach their values, and the government shouldn't put any sort of weird stipulations on that sort of thing. I don't see this as a violation of like separation of church and state, which is another argument that people say is it, school vouchers could violate the First Amendment in that way. I look at it as it would only be discrimination if they said you couldn't send your kids to certain religious schools or whatever. But I mean, religious people pay taxes. We should, not try to impose too much on schools and as little strings attached as possible. Yes.
Would a tax credit get around the separation of church and state issue if it was structured as a tax credit?
Yeah, I mean,
probably to a considerable extent.
To an extent, sure.
I was going to say, for adults, that I believe that this was already decided once in the Supreme Court whether or not for the GI Bill, you could use your GI Bill if you were a veteran to attend a religious college, even to attend a seminary. I believe that it was the case of a seminarian student that went to the Supreme Court and, actually studying to become a minister, and that still qualified, I believe, was the ruling under the GI Bill. I cannot recall off the top of my head what year that was in. So if the analogy there is like, well, okay, if it's good enough for veterans to be able to go to seminary, and I know that a lot of these are these sort of cultural questions become very specific to certain circumstances, and they change from generation to generation. I think when school desegregation in the South was starting, there was a fear that a voucher system would mean, well, people would just go to segregated schools. Maybe if that ever became less of a fear, that might have changed to sort of, well, they'll just take their tax money and run to hyper-religious schools. But one of the things that I find interesting is when I compare the American situation to other countries that have experimented a fair amount with school choice, I was shocked that in some of the social democratic European countries, it's more or less taken as a given that children will have taxpayer-funded education, but at the schools that the parents select from, not everywhere, but I mean, in Finland, in Portugal, in a number of those countries, there was a different approach to the church and state issues where you might have had one predominant religion. I know, like in Ontario, the province, I don't think this is nationwide in Canada, but they had a large French Canadian population in Ontario. So a conservative government in the province of Ontario made the decision to gradually extend the taxpayer funding to French Catholic language schools as well as French language public schools in Ontario. And they did it stage by stage. First, they did up through middle school, and then they did through the first half of high school, and then the second half of high school. So it wasn't passed all at once. They wanted to make sure that Ontario's Protestants wouldn't be up in arms over this reform too much. No, they did this in Ontario too for the French-speaking minority there, next to Quebec, as a means to try and maybe mend fences during the same period Quebec separatism was on the rise. And places like in the Netherlands or something where it's you could have your secular school, your Catholic school, your Dutch Reformed school, all on the Dutch taxpayers. I guess it's not dime, not even a guilder anymore. It's the euro. But that there are different places where people have been more flexible about this than we have. And I've sometimes told my more left-wing friends, Sweden has this. I think Johan Nordberg talked about this in the Free to Choose Network documentary he did about his home country. I know all these American left-wingers who want the things that Sweden has, but they don't want to allow people the flexibility that Swedes would have in having school vouchers or something like that. The same way that they have voucherized healthcare in Sweden.
Yeah, there was
I don't know if that'll win them over. I hope.
There was a couple court cases last year in 2022. I believe the state of Vermont had a what they called their town tuition program that allowed for tuition to be paid through the taxes for for parents to send their kids to local schools, and there were strings attached, as Justin mentioned. There was some providence in there that schools needed to have adequate safeguards that would shield funding from religious education, and some parents took the state of Vermont to court, went to the Supreme Court, and that was ruled that that those parents did indeed have the right to use those funds as they see fit. So I think there's definitely a definite trend moving in that direction. But again, the pushback from the teachers unions are in areas like Chicago where they're so powerful is where we're really going to see the most resistance.
So I think I just want to address that real quick. And for the teachers union, there's a policy that a good policy to deal with public unions that Larry Sharp and his policy team, of which I'm a part, came up with. And basically, when it comes time for any public union to negotiate, they're going to negotiate basically by referendum directly to the people. I think that's going to be probably the biggest way to deal with that, or as far as I know, the best strategy that I know of right now to deal with that behemoth. That's not interfering with this particular initiative to get school choice. In terms of the strings attached, what should there be any strings attached or not? Do we want to have a stance on that, or do we want to leave the language a bit vague as saying little to no strings attached, or do we want to spell it out?
Well, I mean, I think that getting taxes out of education, once we achieve that goal, then who cares? Then there are no strings attached. But as long as there are tax dollars attached to education, then obviously taxpayers do have some sort of a right to say how that money is spent. So that that certainly becomes an issue. I think the parents should have a right to say how that money is spent, and with their local school boards, and what should be in the curriculum, and what should be excluded from the curriculum, and whether we like that or not, it's is it the government's job to dictate what those things are? And we see this now in a lot of schools in public schools in Florida with some of the things DeSantis is pushing, the critical race theory, and some of these other issues and topics that are kind of cultural war talking points right now. That these are some of the arguments that those that feel the government and those educators and those administrators who have studied education and have their PhDs, these should be the ones deciding what those what that curriculum is, and the parents shouldn't have that much of a voice. And then with the opposite being, then the parents should have that option and should have that choice as to influencing what that curriculum is. Obviously things like homeschooling, that solves a lot of these issues. If you're homeschooling, that should some of that voucher money be used to homeschool your kids? Maybe you want to homeschool them. You want to send them to any schools. There's alternative schools. There's there's a lot. Montessori has been a source of alternative schooling for decades, but there's all kinds of ideas of community schooling where you're educating groups of kids, not necessarily by class and age, but by by who lives on the block. And there's different ways and different approaches to education and schooling that really haven't taken off or been examined. I mean, we've kind of been stuck in the same rut you know, the whole education system was based on a Prussian system from the late 1800s that was designed to teach kids in the same manner and have them ready to join the workforce and conform to a certain methodology and way of thinking and way of acting. And that from that, it's kind of involved
the kind of factory model. The bell rings and you move to a different part of the factory.
Correct. And I think that model is still in place. It's now, but now it's taken to the next level. Well, it's not factory, but we need these people to be, you know, we're training the next generation of teachers and educators, and that's really. And that's really where this is going. I mean, there were no PhDs in education back in the 50s and 60s. This is a new field that has been created, and I think part of the issue is they're stuck in that kind of mindset, and part of that is part of the teachers union. They want to keep the jobs for their members. They don't want to change things. They want to make sure every teacher's accredited and has to go through a process. And this is the way that they have to. This is the way what they use to maintain control. And by looking at alternative forms of schooling, and whether it's homeschooling, community schooling, or some of these other things I mentioned, this is a way to kind of break that that bond between education and the teachers union that I think is what is needed.
So when we talk about homeschool, point of clarification, I was kind of assuming that these vouchers would be available to homeschoolers, and it would essentially just go to the family. So maybe I'm making an assumption here. Would that voucher just simply literally be, you have a child, you just get a check? So let's use Adam as an example, his daughter, you know, when she turns 5, does Adam's family, do they just simply get a check? And it's up to their discretion on how they use that check for the purposes of educating their daughter.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
That's probably the best way to
nuance to that.
Yeah, even if I was strongly encouraged by my wife to reinvest that check back in the public system. One thing that it also, the pods, something that started, I don't know if it started during quarantine exclusively, but it certainly took off a bit during quarantine time when a lot of remote learning was very unsatisfying for the parents of smaller children especially. I mean, I get it. Older kids live half their lives online anyway. They sit still better, you know, than elementary school children, and can maybe keep up a little better if they're a little more self-propelled. But for, you know, first graders and second graders online, that was just disastrous. I first heard about this from sort of people that I knew from long ago who have somewhat older children. They partnered with another family and hired a tutor, and basically had a learning pod, I think was what they were called, sort of like your own, not quite a one-room schoolhouse, but I mean, sort of a similar idea. And it sounded a lot better than having the kids learn online. It was just them and a couple of other families they were comfortable sharing their breathing space and their germs with. But the problem is it's only the people who can afford to do that. And that's the part that I find, one of the pieces I always find so frustrating is that, you know, we already have, I think the Chicago public school system is approximately 89% non-white. This is a figure I read, and another pundit during election night had said around the same, close to 90%. And this is in a city that is, you know, not an 89% non-white city. So a lot of the white families have already exited from the public school system, or they've waited for some of the, you know, districts that have become hot, you know, in areas that are especially gentrified that feel kind of secure for them. And I know that for Latino families, African American families, poll after poll after poll for decades, like since the 80s, has shown super majorities that would be interested in school choice amongst Latino parents and African American parents.
Jerome,
that, it's overdue.
A tax credit be one prong, one approach. There could be several prongs to this. So you can, you know, public schools won't, you know, Chicago public schools aren't going to disappear tomorrow. So one of the things you can, one policy solution could be to make it easier for more charters to open up. There's several charter school networks that operate in Chicago. There's, I think each Pritzker and Rauner has probably got a named after one of them in each system. Probably, you can expand charters, which is they're not private schools, but they're kind of just the board of election, the board of education gives them basically a license to operate. And that's one part of the puzzle that can be in the one piece of material for our arsenal.
But let me
And that's
remind
already
you
been.
guys,
Go ahead, Nico.
Yeah, go ahead,
Move
Nico.
to charter.
let me remind you guys that the purpose of the voucher system is not to promote charter schools. It's basically to promote competition within the public school system so that the bad schools are losing money and funding and the good schools are getting more money and funding. And that way you reward the better teachers, you reward the better administrators. And basically, it doesn't mean that the money is going to flow out of the public school system or you're going to eliminate the public school system. So that's an answer to the critics. It's that you're going to make it more competitive and you're going to get results out of the public school system by having public schools compete with each other. So I think that's what we should be promoting more, as opposed to that the money flow now is going to move out of the public school system and it's going to go into the private school system because all the parents are going to choose to send the kids in the charter schools or the private schools.
Yeah, I mean, in theory, that's free market should make the level of education better. It puts pressure on the underperforming schools to perform better. Anytime anything is subsidized by government funding, there's no incentive to improve. There's no incentive to be better. When you have teachers that are protected by the unions, and getting rid of bad teachers becomes more and more difficult. There's no incentive anymore. There and I believe in 2022 there were over 500 cases of sexual assaults in the Chicago public school system. That's insane. That's crazy. And how many of these teachers are were removed and fired because of it? Only a handful. And so that becomes a problem as well. Is if you have schools that are actually able to compete in a less regulated system, and they have more freedom to get rid of teachers that are underperforming and are not bringing their students up to the level of proficiency that needs to be there, then they need to go. And that's the other issue with the unions is protecting these teachers that really should be doing something else and putting people in place that can actually improve the education of the kids. So to me, so much of this just goes back to the power of the teacher union, that's going to be the number one obstacle to try to overcome.
So here's another
And I think
it's a blend of
sorry, go ahead, John.
Yeah, it's just a blend of the teacher union concern and voucher. Similar to the making it easier to create charter schools. What if we encourage the creation of worker co-op schools? So it's basically a school cooperative where the teachers own the school.
Well, I mean, it's certainly. I'm certainly
Sounds
open
interesting to me.
yeah, other alternative methods.
But you already knew I was on your side.
Yeah, I think the work.
Yeah,
that,
I think that there could be a lot. Go ahead.
The co-op option makes it very like, so the teachers have, that way that lets people know that the teachers have, a big say, and not like, some shady, nefarious organization that, it it's like co-ops are just socialist like co-ops, so they they'll like that, and be less opposed, I guess. Oh wow, that's interesting. So worker management
I'll
always
say my
good.
daughter's preschool is a cooperative, so the parents have to pitch in to help for a lot of the auxiliary roles too, and to help defray the costs, and also just to sort of maximize the level of parental involvement. And I so far my daughter seems to have loved it. It's just that only goes up to a certain age, and then it's back to the rest of the game. I was just going to say about the charter thing, and I believe that the beginnings of the charter school experimentation, which the ruling powers that be, even in the city, had been willing to do up to a point. I mean, the Mayor Daley, Mayor Emanuel, the younger Mayor Daley anyway, Mayor Emanuel, and Mayor Lightfoot so far, and that it was the increasing pace of experimenting with charter schools and increasing amount of money involved that helped accelerate the standoff with the teachers union. And when even that, rather, compared to some of the stuff we're talking about, the charter program of the 2000s or early 2010s was far narrower than any of our proposals, and that was already sort of the beginnings of some of the heightened militancy with in the last 10 to 15 years, leading up to the 2012 strike, which had been the first since 1987, if I remember right. It had been a long time since the Chicago school system had gone on strike before 2012. And that some of those appointed CEOs, I know Vallis and then Arnie Duncan, had been, interested in the charters, which was, like I said, a much narrower experiment than we're dealing with. But it seems to have caught on, at least with a lot of the families using them, and caught on to at least some extent with the voters in this town. And this is not a libertarian town. So we know that there's room for appealing to. That's at least my suspicion. It's what people are actually doing in practice, in incremental ways. I think we can encourage them to think about this harder, whether it's worker cooperatives, religious schools, learning pods, whatever.
Yeah, we should be encouraging any forms of alternative education that offer competition to the public school system, and that to me, that's the only way we're going to see any improvements or any change, is to break out of this cycle, break out of the system that's kind of had a hold, especially in urban areas like Chicago, Philadelphia, and some of these other areas that have been kind of suffering the same fate with their public education system.
One thing about charters is if the teachers go on strike, charters still operate. That's all.
Yeah, correct. They would not be tied to the union strike.
Yeah, you think that's a good thing or a bad thing, Justin?
Oh no, that's definitely a good thing for sure. Yeah, I mean, the teachers union can hold the kids of Chicago hostage. We're meet our demands, or your kids don't go to school. So and then you have politicians in the middle that are trying to broker it, and that kind of goes back to what Jerome said: is maybe a lot of this stuff should be on a referendum, instead of allowing politicians to negotiate for us. That would certainly be interesting if teachers wanted a raise and it had to be voted on by a referendum. That would be a pretty interesting campaign. It would be hard for them to show any facts or figures behind their justification. I mean, if you ever look at how much money is being poured into education in this country in general since the creation of the Department of Education, it just it's like 45-degree angle, right? It just keeps going, and yet the test scores and the results are almost the polar opposite. So obviously, pouring more money into education isn't the answer, especially when this money is going to superintendents, administrators, things like this that are not going directly into the classroom. So it's not a matter of spending the money, it's how that money is being spent. And if you're going to say we just need more money, then I think that they're going to have a hard time trying to make that argument.
I think you're on mute, Adam. Can't hear you. Uh-oh. I think it's on your phone or something like that.
Yes, you seem to be muted.
Well, let me just, as Adam's getting back to us here, I'm going to just kind of read back what I have so far. It's just a bullet point. Vouchers make it cheaper per student, more competitive. So these are the pros. More competitive within the public school system. We want to ease the path to opening charter schools. We want to encourage the creation of school cooperatives, so teacher-owned cooperatives, whether those be, I suppose those could be charter or private. We want to acknowledge just the two-tier system that already exists. Potentially, the voucher will be in the form of a tax credit to avoid any concerns about people getting, separation church and state, those type of issues. We want to have little to no strings attached. So the taxpayers reserve the right, but we're being as minimal as possible with strings attached. That's what I have. I'm going to have to write it up, into something that could be put on the website. But anybody else have anything else to add to that I should make sure I include in the final write-up?
I think that pretty much sums it up. I think kind of hit on some of the key points. Again, my feeling is that whatever we can do to kind of put more control of education into the hands of the parents and less control in the hands of the unions, the better off we're going to be. So I'm open to any ideas that are going to move us in that direction.
All right.
Adam, are you back with us here?
Ooh, no sound.
We still have no sound with Adam. Adam did mention he put.
We can read your quote if you like.
Yeah.
He says referendum on salaries for potentially all public officials, not just in the education system.
Absolutely. Our county commissioners gave themselves a raise, and our aldermen gave themselves a raise. Sure, I'd like to give myself a raise too. Who wouldn't? But that decision should be made by those that you're working for, which are the citizens, which are the electorate, which are the voters, and not give yourself, not be able to just automatically give yourself a raise.
Do we want to? And recall. Nico said recall. A referendum to recall public officials. Nico.
Yeah, presently you can only recall the governor,
Mm.
and effectively that's not even true because the requirements are such that effectively it cannot happen. And there's no recall options for all other elected officials in Cook County. So I think we should work for that one too.
Okay, I'm jotting that down. Okay. Um, so with that, I don't know how we feel. With we're coming up on an hour. We have on deck the defend the guard. I think that's a hot one. Do we want to?
Yeah. Yeah, I think I don't think it will take too much time. We can kind of get it wrapped up, but it is kind of a hot topic right now. There's actually a bill going through the Arizona Senate currently on defend the guard. Basically, this falls under the pretext of the 10th Amendment as well, that gives states the rights and the control over those National Guard forces. And with the state of endless war that this country has been in for the past 60 years, since the end of World War II, we've constantly been in a war at some point or another. And more and more, the National Guards are called upon to go overseas and to uh, supplement the military forces that are deployed in various actions across the globe. Um, Even though there has never been a official declaration of war resolution, or in all but just a couple cases, even a war powers act enacted. Um, so and while this is this expands a little bit beyond, obviously Chicago, Cook County, this would be something uh, in more of the statewide arena, but certainly something that we can support and encourage and work with any elected officials on the state and federal level that are represent voters here in Chicago on this particular issue. There was just a resolution that came up in the House of Representatives to encourage Joe Biden to bring the 900 and some troops that are currently stationed in Syria home. I believe our one congressman, Chuy Garcia, voted in favor of bringing those troops home. Danny Davis, our other well entrenched representative here in Chicago, voted against that resolution. So I believe that when it comes to the National Guard, it's a 10th Amendment issue, and that states should be able to either send those troops or retain those troops as they see fit. And I do want to throw up just a kind of a resolution I put together from bits and pieces of some other states and organizations that have been working on this. But I would like to go ahead and maybe just read it real quick, and then we can maybe dice it up and talk about it just for a little while. But this is what I would see as a defend the guard resolution. Each state maintains a reserve military force of part-time soldiers and airmen to serve during emergencies such as natural disasters and riots. Known as the National Guard, these troops are also used to augment the active duty military when the nation is at war. Though not having declared war since 1942, the U.S. military has become increasingly engaged in overseas combat operations without clear goals or definitions of success, resulting in several prolonged operations that have cost millions of dollars and millions of lives and trillions of dollars. And since the attacks on September 11th, 2001, Congress has authorized several unaccountable military operations absent a formal declaration of war, that have resulted in the deployment of state National Guard troops to augment combat operations. Kind of get the gist of it here, but here is what I would kind of the three main bullet points that I would bring up. That the Libertarian Party of Chicago supports calling on state lawmakers to pass legislation barring the deployment of state National Guard in support of combat operations overseas, absent a formal declaration of war from the United States Congress. Calling on Illinois Governor J.B. Pritzker to not comply with any orders from the federal government to release the Illinois National Guard into federal service unless the U.S. Congress has declared war pursuant to Articles 1 and 8, Clause 15 of the U.S. Constitution, and only for the express and explicit purposes enumerated in the Constitution, and that is to execute the laws of the Union, repel an invasion, or to suppress an insurrection. And thirdly, calling on Illinois Governor J.B. Pritzker to bring home said National Guard troops already deployed to foreign conflicts immediately. So that is giving power to the state governors to have control over those National Guard troops, to usurp how those troops are used, have that authority over the federal government, and to keep those troops at home. Thoughts?
I think there's a lot of good stuff in here. I don't really see any real I don't see anything that I really disagree with. It's very right to the point, straightforward, a call to action. And it's classically libertarian. Certainly a resolution. I would be for such a resolution. LP Illinois passed one a few months back. There's still there is HB 2587, which is the Defend the Guard Act in Illinois. It's in the Rules Committee. So yeah, this is a good resolution. There's already kind of a movement there that we can dovetail, and certainly this could be some real tangible change that we can help bring about.
Yeah, and I think what I would really like to do is to start reaching out to some of our state reps with this type of resolution, and kind of find out who who would be able to support such a measure, and kind of work with them on a coalition. Look, right now there's both Republicans and Democrats that would support something like this, and there's both Republicans and Democrats that oppose something like this. So it's definitely an issue that we can get behind. That's libertarian, that is anti-war, and we can work with legislators from both sides of the aisle that kind of support this action, and I think that would be a great coalition to start working on with some of the reps that legislators that represent voters here in Chicago and Cook County.
I mean, you had me at hello, so I'd be curious to know what the arguments are against it. I don't know if anybody knows offhand.
I mean, some of the main arguments against it are that there are those that believe that the military leaders know best, and that areas of foreign policy should be left to the executive branch. While it's hard to argue with that, the resources of individual states should be used in those individual states, and sending National Guard troops overseas, in combat operations, kind of usurps the power of the states, and goes against the 10th Amendment, leaving those powers that are not enumerated to the federal government, to the states. I think there was a resolution or a bill in Idaho as well that looks like it's gaining traction. So it'll be interesting to see what happens in a couple of these states that have advanced this type of legislation. If it does pass, you might start seeing a bit of a domino effect with some other states. Being anti-war is really what brought me to the Libertarian Party. As I think I mentioned, I kind of started out with a more progressive mindset and worked for some progressive policy organizations. But being anti-war is something that neither party can claim to have providence over. It usually depends on who's ever in power. Once the Republicans are in power, the Democrats become anti-war. Once the Democrats are in power, then there's more of an anti-war movement or more isolationist type of movement from the conservatives and Republican Party. And what it really amounts to is, who's ever in power gets to spend all those defense budget dollars, and that's what it really comes down to. So, trying to limit the control that the federal government has on sending the National Guard to some of these operations without a full declaration of war, then that will hinder their ability to expand those military operations and wage war across the globe as they have been for decades.
Thoughts, Nico?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with whatever Jim is saying. I would just hope that this, since it has to do with the Illinois Guard, that the Illinois LP would actually adopt this resolution as opposed to only the Chicago chapter, because it involves and relates to the whole state. That's my only.
Yeah, the state party has as well, and I think it would as something that we can do, especially in in an off election year, right? Like right now where there's we don't have any real partisan races. Some of these issue coalitions that we can start building will certainly help us in the future. So, as the Libertarian Party of Chicago, we can reach out to some of our state representatives, our state assemblymen, our state senators that represent the voters here in Chicago, and with this type of resolution, and find out who is backing this type of legislation, who supports this type of legislation, and how can we work with them to get this type of measure pushed through and brought up for a vote in Springfield. And that's certainly something that we could work on outside of electing candidates in off election years and whatever. It's a very big a very big policy point of mine anyway, that I think we could really be trying to reach out to some of the local politicians and local state representatives and find out where they stand on this issue.
Yeah, I mean, Chicago, Cook County is big, and there are several territory, districts within Cook County that, alone that could make a decision on defend the guard. So, I think it's totally within the scope of LP Chicago to make a comment on it, and yeah.
How about there's a big National Guard facility right out here in Broadview. I mean, geez, that might be a great place for a little bit of a sine wave across the street or something like that, some type of organized. And if we could get a local state senator or state rep that backs this to come join us and maybe get some sound bites on the news station, I think this is definitely a policy point that we could gain some traction with, and might garner some support by the mainstream media.
Yeah, there's also there's also the armory there on North Avenue and I think Kedzie or
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Yeah, there's it's certainly a good idea and certainly worth exploring.
Awesome.
All right. See, I told you that was easy.
Yeah.
I guess, is there anything else anybody wants to say? I think we lost Adam. His connection went bad, so he'll definitely try to jump back on and join us next time. Anything to kind of wrap everything? Wrap up what we've been discussing? I guess Jerome, we can start with you.
No, I think that's good. Those 2 points. I think we have a growing queue of items. I just hope we can reconvene at a regular interval. Yeah.
Thanks, guys, for facilitating this. This was a good discussion. Let's also not forget, for those who are listening, please lpchicago.org/donate. Help us with our, help us grow, help us get this message out to people. So lpchicago.org/donate. Thanks, guys, for putting this together, and very interesting stuff.
Thank you guys for organizing this. It was a fruitful discussion.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun, and it's always great to kick some ideas around. And we'll yeah, I think if we try to do one of these a month or so, that would be really great. And the political climate is always changing. There's always some hot topic that comes up that maybe we can capitalize on, and start bringing a little more attention to our platform policies and ideas. Again, yeah, lpchicago.org. If you're in Chicago area, or anywhere, check out the website and find out what we're all about. And you can always contribute to our efforts. So much of our fundraising goes to getting candidates on the ballot here in Chicago, Cook County, and funding those candidates that have the ideas of liberty and wants to spread that message of liberty to the voters.
Awesome. Thanks.
All right. And without any further ado, then good night, and we'll talk again soon.
Good
night.